Hello geeks and ghouls, I hope you have a spectacular October. It's October 3rd, and since we have this, well, I have this one horror story per day thing going on for Spooktober. That's why you have this spooky setting that's half dark, and probably the picture quality will be awful because of it, but never mind. If it's spectacular, we should probably have something about Stephen King, and instead of starting with a Stephen King story, I decided that I should go for Stephen King's favorite horror story, and that is Sweet for the Sweet by Robert Bloch. That's the story, that's where I found the story. This is a translated edition of my favorite horror story. It's an anthology by Mike Baker and Martin H. Greenberg, where quite a few famous authors like Stephen King, F. Paul Wilson, John Layman, Peter Straub, Joyce Carol Oates, etc. They are choosing one story by some classic authors like Robert Bloch, Richard Matheson, H.P. Lovecraft as their favorite. And Stephen King opens this book and he says that his favorite story is Sweets for the Sweet by Robert Bloch. The reason why he likes Robert Bloch is that when he was growing up and he was very poor, the only paperbacks he could find of horror authors were Robert Bloch's, because Robert Bloch had this very successful book called Psycho, as well as Richard Layman in his own introduction for a Lovecraft story, The Color from Outer Space, which is my second favorite Lovecraft horror story, is saying the same thing, that we read Robert Bloch books, so that's how I met this. And Robert Bloch is kind of an interesting fellow. When he was 16, he published his first story, Weird Tales. He was corresponding with Howard Phillips Lovecraft and Robert Howard and all those this Cthulhu mythos circles, so it was like that meme. And he's really talented. He became very well known for Psycho. It became a movie by Alfred Hitchcock. He wrote some episodes for Twilight Zone. He's definitely a very interesting author. And his story, I'd say that it's a very basic story. Sweets for the Sweet, which is a line from Hamlet, and it's also used by Clive Barker in Candyman in The Forbidden. Alright, a little bit of warning. I'm going to give a synopsis of the story, and it's going to be chock full of spoilers, so if you go read it and return to this video afterwards, alright? Most of those stories are very old and you can find them easily. It's quite interesting. We have this family. There is the father, the daughter, and her nanny, and the brother of the father. And the nanny, it begins with the nanny telling the father's brother that she is outraged by his behavior because he's constantly calling his daughter a witch. And the daughter is a traumatized girl and acts weird, and she's making a doll. And then our nameless protagonist, no, he's not nameless, he has a name, starts to learn that his brother is feeling unwell, yeah, basically the daughter has made a gingerbread voodoo doll of her father and is using it to torture him for mistreating her, and that's the entire story. But what's really interesting is, yesterday I was talking about The Tub by John Layman, and Robert Bloch is writing in a quite similar way. He's using short phrases, a lot of dialogue, a lot of information is given in a very natural way. There's a good flow in the story, and even though it's a very short story and not convoluted, it's not trying to do something more than being a spooky story to read in one sitting and maybe feel a bit of a shiver at the end, because the end is kind of sucking, and that's fun, So yeah, instead of all that, actually it's got a nice clip, and that's fun. And I've read some many years ago. I stumbled upon Cthulhu novel of his, Stranger Eons, which is very hard to find nowadays. The last novel by the Inner Lovecraft Circle, and it also had some short stories, and they were very Tales from the Crypt. They had this shock twist endings in the end. They were not too horrifying, but they were fun. His Cthulhu stories are also quite interesting. What sets Robert Bloch apart from many horror authors is that he has a wicked sense of humor. It's like he's throwing jokes. It's a bit of black humor. At some point, a reporter asked Robert Bloch, how can you, such a nice man, write these horrific stories? And he answered, I've got the heart of a child in a jar on my desk. And that sums up Robert Bloch perfectly. His mythos stories are interesting. He is actually the notorious author who killed Howard Phillips Lovecraft in one of his stories. I think it was The Sampler from the Stars, and then Howard Phillips Lovecraft returned the favor by killing him in The Haunter of the Dark, which is one of his final stories. And then I think Robert Bloch had another story where Lovecraft dies, sort of a trilogy between them, and he was very young back then. But you know what, he's an interesting fellow, and I should probably read more of his books. I mean, I should read Psycho at some point, because I still haven't, and that's quite a shame. That's it's like the pile of shame, the books that I should have read, and Psycho is there, The Exorcist is there. So yeah, it's not a great idea not to read them. I should probably get down to reading those books at some point, but you know what, that happens. So yeah, so it's the three. You know what the story was that it was a very one of those stories that are classic in their simplicity, that stick with you, but their purpose was just to give you a short jolt and then you go on. And that's why my review is not going too much in depth, because there is nothing to say, but it was a good story. It worked on every aspect, the pacing, the characterization, the way it builds up, and the twist. They're all good. It's a fun story, yes. Definitely go and read it. So yeah, that's the spectacular review of me blathering about Robert Bloch, because I picked the story, Stephen King liked it, and I can see why, but I have nothing more to say about it. I've got a lot more to say about tomorrow's story, but yeah, you'll have to wait for that. It's coming tomorrow. And if you don't want to miss it, you press the like button, you subscribe, you hit the bell, and you get a notification when it's on. As always, thank you for watching and stay spooky.